Hi, I'm Emmett, and I wasn't supposed to be at that wedding, not because I didn't belong there, but because they'd worked hard to make sure I thought I didn't. The invitation came late, 2 weeks after the RSVP deadline, stuffed into a plain envelope, my name misspelled like I was an afterthought. It wasn't even mailed to me directly. It went to the old house in Lexington, where Mrs. Alden, our neighbor who still bakes too much for one person, found it tucked behind the electric bill. Looks fancy, she said over the phone, reading the return address. Says Burkhead Financial Group. The groom's firm, not my brother Cole, not my parents, Travis Burkhead. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I stood in my kitchen in Austin, rolling the cold glass of water between my palms, staring at that envelope like it might burn. I could hear Cole's voice in my head, casual, dismissive, always on brand. Why would you even come? It's not your scene. That's the thing about people like Cole. They build scenes. They don't live in them. I didn't call. I didn't ask questions. I booked a flight. I packed light. Just a simple charcoal suit, no tie. My leather boots polished but worn at the edges. The watch my father gave me for my high school graduation, a piece they all loved to joke, was too modest for big rooms. I wasn't flying in to make a scene. I was flying in because, for the first time, I wasn't going to let them define mine. The Charleston airport buzzed with the usual flow of business-class travelers and weekend tourists. Outside, sleek black SUVs idled at the curb, drivers in matching uniforms holding signs with the last names of guests who had been expected. I took the shuttle. The venue was Bay Haven Estate, perched like a jewel just outside the city. Columns wrapped in jasmine, white tents stretched across manicured lawns, chandeliers hung from beams polished enough to catch the late afternoon light. Everything about it whispered that kind of wealth that never had to speak loud. I stepped onto the stone path leading toward the front entrance, invitation in hand, the weight of it heavier than it looked. Before I could offer it, a woman in a headset, Janice, I later learned, looked me over with the kind of practiced glance that ranks you in 5 seconds. Staff enters around the back, she said without blinking. I kept my posture steady, held the envelope a little higher. I'm a guest. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she recovered. She scanned the list on her tablet, frowned, and shifted her weight. Would you mind waiting off to the side for a moment? She asked, voice laced with a kind of sweet that burns on the way down. I stepped back toward the stone fountain at the center of the courtyard, feeling eyes slide across me like I'd walked into the wrong scene of a play. I could hear the soft tinkle of glasses clinking from inside, laughter curling out through the open doors. Then Cole appeared. His suit was sharp, navy tailored to perfection, hair slicked back just so, a smile that belonged on magazine covers. He walked like the world bent a little for him, like gravity tilted politely out of his way. Well, look who dragged himself all the way from Austin, he said, smirking, his voice just loud enough for the nearby guests to catch the edges. Didn't think you'd show. I didn't flinch. Didn't think you'd invite me? His grin widened. Oh, that wasn't me. That must have been Travis. You know how formal he gets with this kind of thing. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to sound sincere. But you made the trip. That's something. A bridesmaid floated past, giving me a once-over that started at my boots and ended with a raised brow. Cole chuckled. Didn't pack the patent leather? I came dressed for the truth, I replied evenly. Not the show. His smirk faltered, just for a second. But then it was back, brighter than ever. Good one, matey, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. You've still got that dry humor. I held his gaze as he walked past, joining a group of men with loosened ties and too smooth handshakes. Standing there, I felt the familiar weight of history settle on my shoulders. The years of being the other one, the one who didn't quite fit their polished version of the family brand. But this time, I wasn't here to fit. I was here to be seen. Ever shown up somewhere just to remind yourself you belong there all along? The courtyard buzzed with polite conversation, the kind where people spoke in smooth tones but measured every word. I could feel the rhythm of the evening before I even stepped inside. The hum of money, reputation, and expectation weaving together like fine threads you couldn't quite untangle. The seating chart loomed at the entrance, framed in gold, each name looped in perfect calligraphy like it belonged in a museum. I moved closer, scanning rows of names that sounded like they belonged in press releases. Table 1 for family, Table 2 for Travis's inner circle of executives, Table 3 for investors and influencers. I followed the elegant swirl of letters down the list until I found the glaring absence. I wasn't on it, not even in the margins. There was, however, one slot left open at Table 8, marked simply as Guest TBD. A blank space, an empty chair that might as well have had a sign, whoever shows up last. They didn't even bother writing my name. I didn't need anyone to tell me what that meant. This wasn't about logistics. This wasn't about a last-minute shuffle. This was about power. A bridesmaid brushed past, catching sight of me with a practiced glance that said staff before she even finished her first look. Her voice, low but laced with the sweetness that cuts sharper than steel, floated to her friend. I heard he's the brother. You know, the other one. The one who never quite made it? The friend answered, her laughter soft but biting. I turned back toward the seating chart, kept my posture steady. The thing about rooms like this, they only let you stay if you know how to take up less space than you deserve. But I wasn't here to shrink. Inside the ballroom, the lights softened as the evening settled in. Chandeliers cast a glow that felt more like a stage than a celebration. Glasses clinked and conversations swirled louder, the current pulling everyone deeper into the illusion. I walked the perimeter, letting the scene unfold without being pulled under. And that's when I heard it. Cole's voice, smooth as always, rose from a circle near the bar. He was surrounded by a group of men in suits worth more than my old apartment, laughing like they'd already closed the next big deal. We scaled the fintech model last quarter, doubled revenue projections. It's all about innovation, knowing where to put the pressure. Cole leaned in, his hands slicing through the air like a conductor. And sometimes you have to trim dead weight to keep a company lean, you know? The group chuckled, their nods automatic. I stayed on the edges, watching, listening. My model, my work, trimmed down, dressed up. But the bones were mine. I wasn't alone for long. Emmett, Cole's voice sliced through the space between us. He drifted over, drink in hand, wearing that easy grin that fooled everyone who didn't know better. I was wondering where you'd wandered off to. He gestured back toward his circle. You ought to come meet some of the guys at Table 2. Good people. Might be something in it for you. I tilted my head, giving him just enough of a smile to keep the edges sharp. I'm good here. Cole took a sip of his drink, leaned a little closer, voice lowering just enough to keep the performance alive. You know, you've got the kind of mind that could do something big. Austin's nice, sure, but there are bigger stages. I met his gaze without blinking. I never left the game, Cole. I just stopped playing it by your rules. For a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. But then the grin returned, polished and hollow. Classic Emmett, he said, clapping me on the back, loud enough for nearby guests to catch the echo. Always the philosopher. He turned back toward the bar, his confidence buoyed by the weight of the room. The air outside felt cooler as I stepped onto the patio. The sky hung in that soft stretch between dusk and night, the horizon a bruised mix of gold and navy. I leaned against the railing, letting the sound of clinking glasses fade behind me. But it didn't stay quiet for long. Just inside the window, a cluster of bridesmaids huddled near the coat check, their voices sharp and unfiltered. Table 8, guest TBD, one laughed. Guess they figured he'd be too embarrassed to show. If I were him, I wouldn't have, another chimed in, her tone thick with mock pity. Those boots, though. Bless his heart, the blonde in the middle added, her voice dripping with condescension. Is he here to celebrate or herd cattle? The laughter stung, but not because it was unexpected, because I'd heard it before. I stayed at the rail, unmoving. Walking away too fast would have given them exactly what they wanted. And I wasn't here for them. I was here for me, for the part of me that stayed quiet too long. Behind me, someone cleared their throat. I turned just enough to catch the eye of Travis Burkhead, groom, CEO, the man whose invitation had brought me here in the first place. His tux was sharp but a little loose at the collar, his drink half full. Emmett, he said, voice low, cautious. Glad you made it. I nodded. Thanks for the invitation. He hesitated like there was more he wanted to say. His eyes darted toward the ballroom, where Cole was holding court again. If you get a chance, Travis added, I'd like to catch up before the night's over. I held his gaze for a moment, the weight of unsaid things pressing between us. Yeah, I said, my voice steady. Me too. Ever watch someone else wear your success like it was theirs all along? The ballroom hummed with the sound of deals disguised as small talk. Glasses clinked, forks tapped against porcelain, and somewhere beneath the surface, the machinery of reputation turned quietly. I stood near the bar, the bourbon in my glass warming in my hand, watching Cole lean into another group of investors. He wore that smile like armor, every gesture choreographed to perfection. His pitch wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about vision. And that vision was mine. I caught just enough of his words to feel the familiar burn. We knew the market was shifting before anyone else. It's about understanding human behavior, anticipating needs before they even know they have them. There it was, the blueprint I had built years ago on the floor of my one-bedroom apartment. Lines of code, user behavior models, projections I'd agonized over for months. Back then, Cole had called it too small time. Now, he sold it like it had sprung fully formed from his own head, and the room ate it up. A hand tapped my shoulder. I turned to face Reed Kingston, the kind of investor who moved markets with a nod. Older, sharp-eyed, wearing his success like a second skin. Emmett Harlow, he said, smiling like we'd just caught up last week. Haven't seen you since the old fintech conference circuit. What was that, Austin? I nodded, the corners of my mouth tightening just enough to hold polite. Still working in that space? I took a slow sip of my drink. In my own way. Reed leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. You know, I always wondered why you stepped back from that model. The behavioral analytics piece. Brilliant stuff. Cole's group is running something very similar now. I let him sit in the quiet for a moment before replying. Funny how that works. Reed chuckled, unaware, or pretending not to be. Market eats its own, doesn't it? His eyes flicked toward the stage where Cole stood, gesturing with ease, surrounded by people nodding like bobbleheads. I should have guessed you two were working together on this one, Reed added. Can't think of anyone else who could have put that framework together so clean. I held his gaze steady. We weren't working together. The smile faltered, just a touch. Reed cleared his throat, glanced down at his watch. Well, always good to see you, Emmett. I watched him drift back toward the crowd, felt the weight of it settle in my chest. This wasn't new. Cole had been wearing my skin for years. The first time it happened, I was too stunned to respond. Back when we were both just here starting out, I'd written a proposal for a startup incubator, something small but solid. Cole had read it over, nodded approvingly, then took the pitch, my pitch, to a different investor. Changed a few words, swapped the logo, called it his own. By the time I found out, the deal was done. And when I confronted him, come on, Emmett, he'd said, grinning that same grin. It's family. We're in this together. I told myself I'd let it go, that the wins still mattered even if my name wasn't on it. But the problem with swallowing that kind of thing is, eventually it poisons you from the inside. I drifted toward the terrace, letting the cool night air strip some of the heat from my skin. The garden lights buzzed softly, casting long shadows across the gravel. Behind me, the ballroom sparkled, a stage I'd never been meant to stand on. But I wasn't alone. Quite the evening, a voice said softly. I turned to see Travis Burkhead standing a few steps away, his drink half forgotten in his hand. He looked like a man trying to stay composed at his own celebration. You keeping up with all this? He asked, nodding toward the ballroom. I gave him a thin smile. I'm getting the highlights. Travis hesitated, then let out a quiet laugh. I have to say, Emmett, this whole thing feels bigger than me sometimes. The company, the projections, the politics of it all. I waited. You know, he continued, eyes drifting back toward the crowd, when we first started, I thought we were building something lean, honest. Cole, he has a way of making things seem bigger than they are. I turned to face him fully. That's his gift. Travis looked at me, something flickering behind his eyes. Sometimes I wonder if it's all smoke and mirrors. His voice softened. And if I'm standing on someone else's foundation? The words hung between us. Inside, the music shifted to something softer, the kind of melody meant to usher people back to their seats. Travis drained his glass, gave me a nod, and disappeared back into the ballroom. I stood there for a moment longer, watching the light spill across the courtyard, feeling the weight of it all pressing down. This wasn't about a company anymore. This was about history, about all the times I stayed quiet, thinking silence was strength. But tonight, that silence was breaking. Ever had someone sell your work like it was theirs and get applauded for it? The ballroom had shifted. The air felt heavier, more aware. It wasn't just the heat from the chandeliers or the weight of wine-soaked laughter. It was something beneath the surface, like the whole place was waiting for the wrong word to land. I stood along the back wall, tracing the edge of my glass with one thumb, watching Cole work the room. He circled the tables, smiling, shaking hands, dropping the same polished sound bites that had carried him this far. But even confidence cracks under pressure, and pressure was coming. A low ripple of applause rolled across the room as the next toast began. My mother. She stepped up to the microphone, poised in her pale blue dress, her voice soft but steady. Family is the cornerstone of every success, she said, smiling that tight smile that always felt more for the room than for us. And tonight, we're here to celebrate not just Cole and his beautiful bride-to-be, but the legacy they're building together. Legacy. That word curled in my chest, bitter at the edges. When I look at Cole, she continued, I see someone who took every challenge, every lesson, and turned it into something extraordinary. The crowd nodded. A few guests clinked their glasses in approval. It's a rare thing to have that kind of vision, that kind of drive, to know what you want and go after it, without hesitation, without doubt. I could feel the weight of her words drifting toward me, deliberate but indirect. That was her specialty, never naming names, just placing blame with surgical precision. The room quieted as she glanced in my direction, just long enough to make the silence sharp. We are so proud of the path Cole has carved. Some of us, she smiled thinly, were born to lead. There it was, the line that cut just deep enough to draw blood, but not loud enough for anyone else to notice. I didn't move, didn't flinch, just let the words settle between us like dust on old furniture. But Travis noticed. From his seat near the head table, he looked at me, something flickering behind his eyes. A question, maybe, or a recognition. As the toast ended, Cole rose again, arms wide as if the applause were his alone. Let's not keep the bar waiting, he joked, and the room burst into laughter. He made his way toward the terrace, weaving through the crowd like he owned the air they breathed. And for the most part, they let him. But I followed. Out on the terrace, the air felt sharper. The night had cooled, a breeze stirring the lanterns along the railing. Cole leaned against the edge, sipping his drink, his eyes scanning the horizon like he was already plotting the next move. You know, he said without turning, you're good at disappearing. I stepped closer, my hands in my pockets. I'm good at knowing when to let the noise pass. He chuckled softly, swirling the ice in his glass. You could have had a place in this, you know. Still could. I raised a brow. A place? He turned then, facing me fully, that grin still plastered in place but stretched thinner now. Yeah, you could have ridden this wave with me, but you always had to make things difficult, always had to take the hard road. I tilted my head. You mean the road where I do the work and someone else cashes the checks? His jaw tightened, just enough to betray the smile. We're family, Emmett. It's all the same win. I let the silence settle. Then I leaned in, voice low but steady. Number, it's not. Behind us, the doors opened, and Travis stepped out, his face tighter than before. He approached, hands tucked into his pockets, eyes flicking between us. Cole, Travis said, clearing his throat. Mind giving me a minute with Emmett? Cole blinked, caught off guard, but he laughed it off, gave me a pat on the shoulder harder than necessary, and drifted back inside. Travis stayed quiet for a beat, watching him go. Then he turned to me. I've been meaning to ask. His voice lowered. How much of what Cole's been pitching tonight was yours? I held his gaze steady. More than he'd admit. Travis exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck. I thought so. He looked back toward the ballroom, his shoulders squaring like he was bracing for something. I've had questions for a while, he added, but tonight, seeing you here, hearing him talk, it doesn't add up. I said nothing. There was power in the pause. You deserve better than this, Travis said finally, voice soft. If you ever decide you want to set the record straight, I'll back you. It wasn't an offer. It was a shift, a fault line opening beneath Cole's empire. I nodded once. We'll see. Inside, the music shifted again, something grander, meant to pull people back to their seats for the next course. But the cracks had already started to show, and cracks only grow. Ever had someone finally notice what you've been carrying all along? The ballroom had begun to tilt, not physically, but in the way conversations shifted. Subtle glances exchanged, smiles that felt too practiced. The cracks were no longer just beneath the surface. They were showing. I stood near the edge of the room, watching Cole step up to the microphone. He tapped it twice, smiling like he was about to deliver the speech that would cement his place at the top of this carefully constructed empire. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice smooth as glass, tonight is about family, about legacy. He paused, letting the words breathe, letting the weight of them settle over the crowd. I felt Travis move in behind me, just close enough that his presence felt intentional. Cole continued, we've built something extraordinary here. Not just a partnership, but a movement. And I couldn't have done it without the support of those who believed in me, my family, my team, my investors. The crowd offered polite applause, but I could feel the unease, like everyone was holding their breath for the next line. And, Cole added, eyes sweeping the room, for those who may have doubted, well, tonight speaks for itself. There it was, the dig, crafted just sharp enough to cut without drawing blood. But someone else was bleeding. A voice rose from the back of the room, calm, even. Does it? Heads turned, a ripple of movement as people craned to see who had spoken. It was Reed Kingston, the investor I'd spoken with earlier. He stood now, arms folded, eyes fixed on Cole. Because I've got a question, Cole, Reed said, his voice carrying easily. This model you've been selling tonight, I've seen it before, years ago. Cole's smile faltered, but only for a second. Great minds think alike, Reed. The market has a way of converging. Reed didn't blink. Funny thing, though. I remember Emmett walking me through something almost identical back at the Austin Summit. The room quieted. I didn't move. Didn't need to. Cole's laugh was soft, forced. Emmett's my brother. Of course we bounced ideas off each other. Reed shook his head. This wasn't bouncing ideas. It was a full framework. Behavioral analytics, market projections, user engagement models. Word for word, Cole. The silence thickened. Travis stepped forward, clearing his throat. I can back that, he said, voice steady. When we first discussed the partnership, it was Emmett's name that came up. Cole assured me he was just consulting. Cole's jaw clenched. We're family, he said, his voice tightening. We work together. Do you? Travis shot back. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been building this on his back. Phones were out now, guests pretending to check messages, but recording every second. A few whispers rippled across the tables. Cole turned toward me, eyes sharp. You're really going to do this? Here? I held his gaze. I'm not doing anything. The words hung there, suspended, but it wasn't done yet. One of the journalists, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper pen, stood. I think the question is, she said, voice clean as a blade, does Revised Tech's IP belong to Cole Harlow or Emmett Harlow? Gasps, like falling dominoes. Cole's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Travis stepped closer to the journalist, nodding toward the projection screen behind the stage. You might want to check tonight's presentation deck. See whose name is listed on the original patent drafts. The screen flickered to life. Ruben, Travis's tech lead, must have triggered it remotely. Slide after slide rolled across. Design blueprints, email chains, early concept models. My name on everyone. The room tipped. Investors began to murmur, pulling out phones, exchanging glances. A few sponsors stood abruptly, shaking their heads. "This isn't what we signed up for," one of them muttered. I watched as Cole's carefully built world started to buckle. My mother, seated near the head table, turned pale. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair, knuckles white. But Cole, he wasn't done. "This is ridiculous," he barked, stepping forward. "This is just family business being aired out." "No, Cole," Travis cut in, voice hard now. "This is fraud." The word hit harder than any shout. A glass shattered somewhere near the back of the room. No one turned to look. All eyes stayed on the stage. Cole's mouth worked, but the words wouldn't come. "This partnership is dissolved," Travis said, calm as steel. "Effective immediately." He turned to face the crowd. "Any sponsors or investors with concerns can reach out to me directly." The ballroom was quiet, save for the soft clink of people gathering their things. Cole stood frozen. My mother finally spoke, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Emmett, we didn't know." I looked at her steady. "You never asked." The room emptied slowly, a tide of wealth and power pulling back from the wreckage. But I stood still, not to gloat, not for revenge, just to let the dust settle. Ever seen a house of cards collapse without touching a single one? The ballroom had emptied. The weight of whispers, stares, and retreating footsteps lingered like smoke. Only a few remained behind, gathering pieces that couldn't be salvaged. Shattered reputations, broken deals, the hollow echo of what had once felt untouchable. I stood by the terrace doors watching the last of the sponsors slip out into the night, their polished shoes crossing the marble floor with a finality that didn't need words. Cole sat slumped at the head table, staring into a glass that had long since emptied. His tie hung loose around his neck, the shine on his shoes dulled by the scuffs of what he'd just lost. My mother perched beside him, her hands folded tight in her lap, knuckles pale beneath the soft blue silk of her dress. For a moment, I thought about walking out without saying a word, letting the silence finish what had begun. But sometimes the hardest thing isn't standing up. It's standing still long enough to look someone in the eye. So I crossed the room. Cole didn't move until I was a step away. His eyes met mine, sharp edges dulled, but the fire still flickered in the ashes. "You happy now?" His voice was rough but steady. "You got what you wanted." I leaned my hands on the back of a chair, steadying myself without rushing. "I never wanted this," I said quietly. "I wanted the truth." Cole laughed, a brittle sound that didn't carry far. "You could have come to me. We could have handled this like family." "Family?" The word sat heavy between us. I leaned in, voice low enough that only he and my mother could hear. "You used that word every time you wanted to take something from me. Every time you needed my work, my ideas, my silence. But family isn't what you say when you want to win. It's what you prove when there's nothing left to gain." My mother shifted, her eyes soft but guarded. "We didn't know the extent of it," she offered, voice cautious. "You never said anything." I straightened, letting the weight of her words settle. "I did," I replied. "Maybe not loud enough for you to hear, but I did." She looked away, her lips tightening at the corners. "You always kept your distance," she said, quieter now. "Always made it hard to reach you." I nodded once. Distance taught me how to stand on my own. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unsaid things. Moments where I'd shrunk myself down to fit the mold they held for me, and now there was no shape left for me to fill. I stepped back, resting my hand on the chair for a moment longer. "I'm not here to make you pay for what you did," I said, eyes steady on Cole. "I'm here to let you live with it." He flinched but said nothing. I turned toward my mother, softer now. "You built your world by cutting me out of it. I've just made sure you remember that was your choice." Outside, the terrace lights buzzed in the night air, casting long shadows across the gravel. I walked through them without looking back, not for revenge, not for victory, but for peace. The valet brought my car around, headlights slicing through the darkness. As I waited, Travis approached quietly, his jacket slung over one shoulder, face tired but resolved. "You sure you're okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm better than okay." He smiled faintly. "You'll land on your feet." I never left the ground. We shook hands, the grip firm but not lingering. As I slid into the car, the dashboard lights flickered to life, casting a soft glow across the leather seats. I sat for a moment, letting the engine hum beneath me. I didn't need to race away. I had nothing left to run from. At the hotel, I dropped the envelope onto the desk. The presentation deck, the emails, the patents. Proof of everything I'd held back for so long. I folded it once, slid it into the drawer, and left it there. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about knowing I could. Ever walked away not because you lost, but because you were done shrinking to fit someone else's story? Sometimes reclaiming your place isn't about shouting louder or proving anyone wrong. It's about standing firm when the ground shakes beneath you and choosing to stay rooted in your truth. For years, I let others write my story, convinced that silence was strength. But I've learned that quiet doesn't have to mean invisible. And dignity? It's something you never owe to anyone else's version of you. If you've ever felt erased, overlooked, or undervalued, I hope this reminds you. You don't need permission to take up space. Let me ask, have you ever had to stand your ground when it would have been easier to disappear? Share your thoughts or tell me where you're watching from. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe for more journeys that speak to the quiet strength inside all of us.